Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good morning. I'm probably one of the outsiders here because when I hear of the fantastic work in Montana, in Argentina, in Australia, and we are probably the tiniest country that's represented here. And however, you will see that we've done some amazing conservation work, and we can go through it later together. So I start with this slide because this is an artistic representation based on paleoecology of what Mauritius would have looked like. It's created by somebody called Julian Hume, who's an ecologist and is a painter, and he reconstructs these ecologies. And what do we see here? We find flamingos, we find night herons, parrots of all sorts. We find tortoises, of which there's been a great interest here. I will talk about that a bit later. Rails, kestrels, which almost went extinct, harriers, blue pigeons, a very great variety of birds, reptiles, and plants. We are one of the most biodiversity-rich countries in the world, with endemicities that range up to 67% for the plants, and for the reptiles, above 90%. So very high endemism. Now, some of you have asked me where Mauritius is. Now, we are east of Madagascar. There's about 1,000 kilometers that separates us from Madagascar. And much of my talk will be on Mauritius itself and Rodrigues, which is an island which is part of Mauritius. And collectively, Mauritius, Réunion, and Rodrigues are what we call the Mascarene Islands. We share a lot in terms of biodiversity, but we still have a species that's unique to each island. And as you know, biodiversity hotspots are characterized both by high endemicity, but grave threat to that biodiversity. Now, Mauritius itself, as I mentioned, is composed of several islands. And I'll be talking quite a lot about the northern islands, especially this island here called Round Island, which is world-renowned for its threatened biodiversity. I will also talk about the southeastern islands, and in particular Îles Aigrettes, which is just here. And I'll also be talking about Rodrigues, which is an island found 600 kilometers to the east of Mauritius. So this is just to situate yourselves geographically what we'll be talking about. Now, although we are small islands, we have some of the largest EEZs in the world, going up to 2.2 million kilometers square of sea. And also there's extended continental shelf of 400,000, which we share with Seychelles, and there's talk of getting more. And I also put up something here, which is Chagos Archipelago. We can talk about this later, it won't be in my talk, but Chagos Archipelago is at the center of a debate between Mauritius, Britain, and France for the past 50 years, where the Americans have set up a military base, a nuclear base there, but those islands have got amazing biodiversity that's left on them, and we are gearing ourselves to be involved with Chagos. We also get involved with Sint-Brandon Group, and we also get involved with Agaliga as well, and a lot of other places. Now, most of you would probably never been on Mauritius, you probably don't know much about Mauritius, so I just wanted to give you a bit of background about what Mauritius is about. So we have a population of around 1.2, 1.3 million. We have a high life expectancy of 79 years, an aging population. Total land area is 2,000 kilometers square. We are one of the highest density of people in the world with 638 people per kilometer square. It's a good economy. It's going through some difficulties right now, but it's by and large a very good and upcoming economy in Africa, with a real GDP of 3.5. At other times, we were up to 8% of GDP. And we have a high GDP per capita, which is 13,000 USD per person, which sets us at a high-income developing country. And we get lots of tourists. We get nearly 1.5 million tourists that will be visiting in 2026. So we are one of the most economically strong countries in Africa, with textiles, the sugar, which has gone out a little bit, but we also have the finance sector, which is very prominent. And we rank there high up there with Seychelles and Botswana, for example. And in terms of HDI value, so 0.86, so a human development index very high, top performers in Africa. Adult literacy is over 90% for men and women. I can tell you the girls are doing much better than the boys. And connectivity is great. I mean, most people have 2 mobiles and 1 landline and so on, so great connectivity across the island. Now, that was an introduction to Mauritius today, how it looks like. But Mauritius in the past would have been a very biodiverse country and extremely rich in plants, in reptiles, and some of the evolutionary processes that actually are next to none in the world. And Rodrigues was also described as a very, it was even described as Eden by the Huguenots, the French Protestants who came to the island in 1691. And they described what the island looks like, and this is an artistic representation with manatees, with lots of seabirds and tortoises and all sorts of animals. And you can see this is a typical reconstructed habitat of Rodrigues with parrots, with tortoises, with rails, with blue pigeons, with fruit bats. I'll be talking about fruit bats later. And something started going wrong as from the 1600s. Men started settling on the island. The first to settle were the Dutch. They discovered it by accident. I hope there's no one Dutch here, so no hard feelings there. But when the Dutch came, they found this country with lots of hardwoods, with lots of tortoises, with dodos. This is the first representation of the dodo here. But what they also started doing is exploiting the marine resources. They also started chopping down the forests and burning down the fat of tortoises. And destruction started right from when men landed on the island. There was heavy exploitation of our hardwoods, especially the ebonies, which were sent to Europe. And within 75 years, the dodo would go extinct. And this is how the French actually drew. This is a drawing from 1691 of Rodrigues, showing all these beautiful animals, including the solitaire, which is a cousin of the dodo, which also went extinct, and several other forms that have gone extinct. We have had some of the highest extinctions of a species in the Mascarenes, both on Mauritius and in Rodrigues. And these are all the wonderful animals, or a sample of all these wonderful animals that have gone extinct, unfortunately. And the greatest of extinctions is the dodo. It wasn't the first extinction. It wasn't the last extinction. It wouldn't be the last extinction. But what was interesting with the dodo is it was the first time that mankind realized that extinction is forever and that man can cause extinction. And we could argue here that the birthplace of conservation, of modern conservation, actually started in Mauritius with the demise of the dodo. Now, here again, a graph here showing some of the trends that have happened. What's in green here is cover, vegetation cover. And throughout the Dutch, the French, the British, and the Mauritians, we have been losing habitat on Mauritius. So we now have less than 5% native habitat on Mauritius and less than 2% of good quality native habitat. And in parallel to that, as we've been losing vegetation, our human population has also been increasing. And this is a typical scenery of Mauritius today. And people come to Mauritius, they fly over the island and they see green, lush vegetation and they say, this is paradise. Unfortunately, much of this has been converted to sugarcane. And on the hills, although you still find native and endemic species, it's largely overtaken by invasive alien species that have been brought in over the past 400 years. Similarly, on Rodrigues, invasive species, deforestation, high density of cattle rearing have caused Rodrigues to lose much of its biodiversity. And the lowest point in conservation was actually in the 1970s, when many species would have joined the dodo, including the Mauritius kestrel, the echo parakeet, the pink pigeon, the Rodrigues fruit bat, the round island boas. By the way, one boa did go extinct in 1975, the round island burrowing boa, and is the only snake to have gone extinct in modern times. And habitats such as Îles Aigrettes and Round Island were also going down the drain very rapidly. And this is when there was a consciousness that was building up, saying that we have to save the species on Mauritius. It was led by famous people such as Sir Peter Scott from IUCN and World Wildlife Fund. It was driven by others such as Gerald Durrell, who came to Mauritius in 1975 to write a book. Only wanted to sit down, smoke, drink, and write a book. And then he got pulled into the conservation problems of Mauritius. And actually, they've stayed for ever since. Now, in the 1970s, we had the rarest bird of prey, which was the Mauritius kestrel, which went down to 4 individuals, including 1 single breeding female. We had the rarest pigeon, which is the pink pigeon, which went down to 12 to 20 individuals, and it continued to decline to 9 individuals in 1990. We had the rarest parrot, the echo parakeet, which went down to 15, 25 individuals in the 1970s. We had the rarest fruit bat in the world, the Rodrigues fruit bat, which due to cyclones, intensive cyclones, and accompanying that is deforestation, went down to probably as low as 30 individuals. And we had also had the rarest reptile in the world. Not a great record for any country, you'd tell me. Now, it was at this point that conservation work started in Mauritius. And Gerald Durrell got involved, and a number of international organizations, Kew Gardens, BirdLife International, it was called ICBP in those days, and Jersey Zoo. And they came together and they said, we have to create a Mauritian organization to do the fundraising in Mauritius, because Mauritius was coming out of economic problems at that time, and also to develop local capacity to do this work. So 1984, 42 years ago, the Mauritius Wildlife Foundation was created with the help of many international organizations, but also the government of Mauritius. We needed to get their buy-in to be able to do this organization. They weren't very happy with the creation of an NGO, I can tell you, but at the end of the day, they joined the bandwagon. And so this is how Mauritius Wildlife Foundation was created in 1984. We celebrated 40 years just 2 years ago. And we've been at it, trying to restore those ecosystems which were becoming extremely degraded. This is Round Island in 1972, having lost nearly all of its palm forest. And the work that we've been doing since then, eradicating goats, eradicating rabbits, restoring plants, means that much of Round Island, especially on the west of the island, is now clothed with a palm forest. On Îles Aigrettes, it was used for military exercises in the 1960s. And at the back here is all invasive acacia. And what we've turned it now is native vegetation. We've been working on this island since 1985. And on Rodrigues, what's a barren landscape in the 1960s, good part of it now is a nature reserve with extremely rare endemic plants. And on Mauritius, we pioneered something called conservation management areas in the Black River Gorges National Park. What we would do is to find areas of high endemicity, such as here, the black ebony of Mauritius, and we would weed out the invasive plants. There's a very invasive plant that comes from Brazil, no offense to any Brazilians around here, called the Chinese guava or the strawberry guava. It's highly invasive on Mauritius. And we get rid of guava here, as you can see. And then we put a fence around those areas to prevent pigs and deer, both introduced from Indonesia. No offense to any Indonesians around here. And we keep them out of these areas. And in about 10 years' time, we get good quality, grade 1 forest back on Mauritius with ferns, orchids, ground vegetation, substrata at all the levels. And pink pigeons, echo parakeets, and various other endemic birds start using those areas. We have higher density of insects and reptiles using those areas. So this concept of conservation management areas, CMAs, although was over small areas of forest, there's now scope to expand these significantly more than what they were. And we were also behind the creation of the first national park of Mauritius, the Black River Gorges National Park. It's the largest area of contiguous forest that's found in the southwest of Mauritius. And recently, we've been thinking about where are we going in terms of our plant work. I've heard very little about plant work, but we do a lot of work on plants and habitat restoration. And we've been looking at those biomes on Mauritius that's actually needing a lot of our help and our attention. The island plant communities, the lowland coastal plant communities, etc., the upland plant communities, and the rare plant community of Mauritius. And they're all, highly threatened by climate change. And we've looked at the other different pressures that could be impacting on these species, and they all come out as very high in terms of threat targets. I'm presenting to you here our flora strategy, which started since this year. And this is the flora strategy for the next 10 years. However, I've been hearing of different time frames. Very typically our time frames are a year, 3 years, 5 years, depending on the funding, and I've heard of other figures. We are now working on 100-year visions. We have been working on these species for the past 50 years, 55 years. And the end of the road is not in sight. We probably will be holding these species for the next decades. So we have to think of very long-term time frames. We are looking at 100-year visions for most of our species and most of our ecosystems. And I'd like to invite you to start thinking very long term. And I know it's challenging to our funders because they like to have projects done in 3 years and 5 years. But we are telling them that if we want to reach somewhere, we are going to be at it for the next 100 years. How do we work? Well, there's something developed by Carl Jones, who a few of you know. He developed the 5 stages of species restoration. Although it was intended for birds to start with, however, it applies to many species, probably all species. Know your species, the very biology of where does it nest? How does it nest? What is its reproductive success? What is its lifetime expectancy, etc.? All those basic questions. Understand what is actually impacting that species. Is it invasive species? Is it climate change? Is it habitat destruction? Is it diseases? What is it that's actually limiting those species? Intensive management. Every single egg in the bird programs which I've talked to you about, every single egg, every single chick counted. They were highly important. But at one point, you get out of this IC, intensive care unit zone, and this is where the individual egg or individual chick doesn't matter that much. You're looking at population level. Is this population increasing? Is this subpopulation doing well? And monitoring and research. Once you've gone through all those phases, you still need to monitor and conduct research. And this is how we've done for saving those 3 iconic, enigmatic birds of Mauritius, the pink pigeon, the kestrel, and the echo parakeet. But we've also, as from the 2010s, we started tackling smaller birds, the small forest birds, passerines. So we started with the Mauritius Fody and the Mauritius olive white-eye, which have been success in their own rights as well. But we also have been working on Rodrigues, very different strategies. On Rodrigues, saving these 2 birds, which I will talk to you a little bit later about, has rested upon 2 things: habitat creation and education and policy change. That's all. We didn't do any fancy captive breeding and releases and predator control, and supplementary feeding and all of this. We did not do any of this fancy stuff. It was just based on habitat creation and education. Now, Let me come back to the 5 species that we've been restoring on Mauritius. So, what did we do? Captive breeding for pink pigeons, echo parakeet, kestrels, olive white-eyes, Mauritius foodies. Reintroduction into the wild. Predator control, controlling the rats, the cats, the mongooses, keeping out the monkeys. Supplementary feeding, because we believe that the forest is in bad shape and may not be giving all the food that the animals require. Let's give them a little boost. So we provide supplementary feeding to our birds. Nest box provision. The natural nest cavities are becoming rare because there's habitat degradation. The old trees are dying out. Those natural cavities are not available. We need to put in nest boxes. So we've been designing nest boxes for forever. And every year we are tinkering around these nest boxes, making them better and better and better. Those nest boxes today, they are of recycled plastics, for example. We also do intensive monitoring. We have some of the best data sets for any living birds on the planet. That's the Mauritius kestrel. From the 4 birds that I talked to you about to the 350 birds we have today, we have a tab on all of these birds. Same goes for the pink pigeons, and same goes for the echo parakeet and the other birds which we've been restoring. Habitat restoration, very important. And lots of research with universities, local universities, but also universities from Europe, Cardiff, UEA, can name them, a lot of them, Copenhagen, etc., looking at various aspects of research. And we are picky on the research, and we are getting picky on research because it has to answer the questions that we need answering. Not research for the sake of research. It's got to be research that informs us and directs us. Now I'd like to talk to you of how we went about restoring islands. This one is Îles Aigrettes, which I mentioned to you earlier on. Very important because it has a lowland coastal habitat that's gone from the rest of Mauritius. This island here is 26 hectares. And on that island, it's got some of the remnants of the last population of plants on Earth found on this island. This island, unfortunately, had rats. It had cats. We got rid of them. Sorry for those people who love rats and cats. And we had to get rid of acacia. We're actually winning this war. This is the Indian mushroom. We haven't won the war on the Indian mushroom, but we've actually knocked them back seriously. And we've been doing restoration, removing those invasive plants, putting back in their stead native plants of Mauritius. And we've been releasing birds, reptiles. We've been attracting seabirds on this island. And we've been putting back tortoises. Now, the tortoises went extinct. We had 2 species on Mauritius, 2 species on Rodrigues, 1 species on Réunion. We had 2 types of tortoises, saddleback tortoises and Aldabra tortoises, which you find just outside here. And we've been plugging them back to replace the extinct Mauritian tortoises. It's been an amazing success. We've done this on Mauritius, and I'll show you later on. We did this on Round Island, and we've also been doing it in Grand Montagne in Rodrigues. And this is the result that you get. Restored habitat that supports biodiversity. And in years, we've stopped thinking just as scientific organizations, but bringing in people. We bring children to this island, thousands of children every year. We've started ecotourism, which has brought us a very important income flow for the organization. And we've been working at restoring Round Island. Round Island is to the north of Mauritius, 219 hectares. Is thought to have the highest number of threatened species on the planet per hectare. And this is what it looked like in 1972, and this is what we are recreating now. And throughout, for better part of 150 to 200 years, it had poachers going onto the island, because people had released goats and rabbits on the island as stowaways in case there was a shipwreck. Sailors would get food on the island, so it was a stowaway. And unfortunately, those stowaways, the rabbits and the goats, they just decimated the flora. and they actually cause massive soil erosion on this island. And we also had lots of seabird poaching. This is the last seabird poaching from 1996. And around that time, our visits to the island got very regular. We were going there in police helicopters. So poachers started getting afraid that they would be caught by the police. So since 1996, there hasn't been, touch wood, there hasn't been a single poaching event on the island. And in 2001, we set up a field station on the island. We've got James Dunlop here, who actually was a warden on Round Island. And we've got this field station, we've got people who are stationed on the island for most of the year, except when cyclones are approaching. For safety, we get them out of the island. Otherwise, they stay on the island. We welcome volunteers, and we do fantastic work here on the island. And the number of seabirds has actually shot up through the roof. Red-tailed tropic birds, white-tailed tropic birds, shearwaters, petrels. I can talk to you about petrels later on. It's in itself, it's just an amazing species. I did my PhD on it, that's why. And we decided to bring tortoises to the island. The last place where tortoises went extinct was from that island in 1844. So we thought, let's bring back tortoises as surrogates. And I can tell you, it didn't happen with all the easiness that you would like. There was a lot of opposition to it. I remember having a fight with the director of our National Parks authorities over putting tortoises on the island. Now they are one of the greatest supporters of the work. Now we've also been recreating this hardwood. This hardwood was completely gone from Round Island. Now we're recreating the hardwoods. We are also doing a lot of reptile translocation, and we've also saved the species from extinction, and that's why I've got this species here is the orange-tailed skink, which was on one island called Flat Island, which is in the north of Mauritius. It was doing extremely well, and then shrews got to the island. And within a year, over 1 million reptiles were killed by shrews. So we had to do an emergency rescue of these orange-tailed skinks. We put them onto other islands where there are no shrews, where there are no rats. Whilst they've gone extinct on Flat Island, they still survive now in good numbers on Gunner's Coin. So it was a species extinction that we've avoided at the very last minute and in the nick of time. We also work with lots of rare plants. Over 90% of our endemic plants are red-listed on the IUCN Red List. And we are working on red listing. And also, 59% of our plants, of our trees, are threatened with extinction. So we have a lot of work to do on plants. This is some of the plant work that we do in Rodrigues on species that are critically endangered. And we are growing plants. This plant here, which you see here, is the Café Marron, Ramosmania rodriguesi. It was thought extinct. And a young schoolboy discovered one plant. Young schoolboy. And then we started working with this species. And now we've saved it. Every year we are growing hundreds of this together with the Forestry Service on Rodrigues. It's a species that is no longer going to go extinct because we are saving it. But I will come back to this later. And we are also working on plants in nature reserves, and that's very important, piecing back together the plants. I was telling you about the Rodrigues fruit bat. The Rodrigues fruit bat almost went extinct in the 1970s, less than 100, and some believe that it went down to probably 30 individuals. And the populations have been growing. In parallel with habitat creation, we've been pushing for creation of habitat with native species. It's not always gone in the direction that we had wanted, because some of this habitat creation has been with exotic species, yet it's still provided some habitat to the Rodrigues fruit bat. And the numbers keep growing. And despite us having cyclones, those fruit bats bounce back very well because there's enough habitat for them. And one of the things which we've been able to push through education is we've been able to stop poaching of fruit bats on the island. And I just wanted to say that our latest survey in 2026 shows there's 27,000 bats on an island which is 11 by 9 kilometers. And we have the most complete survey of this bat for any bat species in the world. is on the Rodrigues fruit bat. And it's data that's going back to 1974. So continuous data. So we also do a lot of environmental education, both on Mauritius and on Rodrigues. And one of the things keeping with bats is, unfortunately, on Mauritius now, we are back on Mauritius, we have a Mauritius fruit bat. This fruit bat is now become the center of a human-wildlife conflict. The fruit bat numbers have been growing, but the fruit bats not only feed on native plants, which they disperse, but they also feed in orchards. They also feed on backyard trees of longans, lychees, mangoes, and that brings them in direct conflict with people. And since 2002, we've been battling against culls. So the government sanctioned a cull of fruit bats from 2015, and there have been several culls, and over 60,000 bats have been killed officially by our police force on Mauritius, when the total number of bats is around just over 100,000. So it's actually, for a species that's red listed, for a species that's critically endangered right now, to have such a level of culling is just unbelievable. Unfortunately, at sometimes we've been referring both positively and negatively to Australia, where there have been culls of fruit bats or flying foxes. But also, some of the solutions are coming out from Australia as well, such as netting, such as pruning of trees, and so on. No offense to any Australians out there, by the way. So this is a human-wildlife conflict which we've been trying to, very often we get into a lot of, we get negative press also on this, because we are not on the side of the farmers. Farmers think that what we are only concerned is about fruit bats. We try to tell them we are as concerned about the fruit bats as we are for your livelihoods as well. So we are trying to do an approach which is win-win situation. And we are working, but it's taking time. Now, something which we never expected we'll have to deal with, and that was not on the agenda, was an oil spill. So in 2020, we had an oil spill which was only 2 kilometers from Îles Aigrettes, the first oil spill that Mauritius has experienced. And within less than an hour, the oil was floating to Îles Aigrettes, which I told you about. So this is Îles Aigrettes here. This is the ship that ran aground, and this is oil spilling out from the ship, and it was around Îles Aigrettes. We had to take very quick, very bold moves, and we rescued some reptiles from the Southeast Islands. We took them off to Jersey Zoo. In itself, it was a feat, because remember, we were in COVID. The airspace was logged, and we were rescuing reptiles, and we were sending to UK. If you can realize how much diplomacy, now, and I'll end on this later on, if you wonder how much diplomacy and behind the scenes and behind the curtains work had to be done, we can talk about it over coffee break. But it was amazing. We had to work directly with the Prime Minister's office to allow this to happen, to make this happen. Now, although the oil spill is behind us, and the population of those reptiles has bounced back, the studies that we're doing together with the University of Cardiff have shown that genetically, those reptile populations are impoverished now. So we are having to repatriate those reptiles that were sent to Jersey Zoo. We are bringing them back to Mauritius now, and we are re-releasing on those islands within 5 years. And somebody was talking to me about the importance of zoos. It's a way to reflect of the modern importance of zoos as well, how they can help in conservation. And that's a clear example of that. So here are some of the outcomes. Pink pigeons. So pink pigeon populations, you can see nice curves here. We are now over 600 birds. Mauritius kestrels. I wanted to show for a long time they almost went extinct, but then they've been saved. You do not recover species overnight. It takes time. It takes decades. And Last year, we downlisted the Rodrigues fody and the Rodrigues warbler. Remember, those species, one species was even thought extinct in the 1960s. Both were less than 30 individuals on Rodrigues. Today, we have 10,000 of each of them. And those species have grown from extinct, question mark, or near extinct, to being least concern last year. And this made the headlines of IUCN downlisting for last year. And in terms of some of the trends, tailface skinks, you can see here, from 5,000 to 49,000. Round island boas from around 50, 75 to nearly 1,500. Orange-tailed skink, which almost went extinct, remember? Now, we don't have 25,000 like we used to have, but we have 2,000. At least they are not extinct. But this is a species that within a year was going extinct. We've also declared the Mauritius kestrel as the national bird. Believe it or not, although we became independent in 1968, we've never had a national bird. Whenever you ask Mauritians or people from outside, what's the national bird of Mauritius? They will tell you it's the dodo. Fair enough, but the dodo is extinct. Can you have an extinct bird as your national bird? We said that we should take pride in the work that we've done saving the Mauritius kestrel. And I'll tell you later how we got around about that, but this is one of our achievements, making the Mauritius kestrel a national bird. We also managed to, the work that we've been doing in the national parks has actually pushed for it to become, to be upgraded in terms of the Man and Biosphere Reserve. So they've actually increased the area under Man and Biosphere Reserve from 6,500 hectares to 8,500 hectares by collaborating with the private sector, those who are on the ridge of the national parks. So the other thing is there's been assessments about our work on birds. 31 birds would have gone extinct between 1984 and 2004 without conservation actions. 5 of them are from Mauritius. We are leading in terms of bird conservation in the world, beating Hawaii, beating the US, and beating even New Zealand. No offense to New Zealanders out there. And these results are taken up in a number of publications, which I'll just show here. And one of these publications came out from somebody I didn't know, somebody called Ignacio Jimenez. I think some of you may know him. Now, we came up with this assessment of effective conservation organizations. And I think you're represented here. The Australians, the Argentinians, the African wildlife parks, and the Mauritius Wildlfe Foundation. As I say, we stand here as an outlier. We don't have the scale that the other organizations have. We are a small NGO. And yet, we've been able to do some time of groundbreaking work. And I won't go into the details, perhaps I do. But what does Ignacio and Basulto say? They say, this framework includes clear and shared proactive vision inspired by innovative on-site senior leadership. Number 2, high contextuality based on shared leadership, on-the-ground administrative autonomy, and practice-based learning. Number 3, outstanding and well-communicated conservation outcomes. Number 4, linkages across the scales to access varied types of resources, political, social, and economic. And 5, long-term financial viability. So those are the ingredients, if I may say, of effective conservation organizations. And I'm great to be sharing this platform with some of those leaders in this world. Now, I'll just jump back to ecotourism. I've heard about ecotourism quite a number of times. But the ecotourism that started very timidly for us in 1999, we are ranked number 7 of 271 things to do on Mauritius for our ecotourism work on Île aux Aigrettes. And we get these accolades every year in terms of Traveler's Choice Award and all of this. We're even ranked 7 out of 200, one of the top 25 things to do in Africa. And Grand Montane, although it's a very new ecotourism product, we are one of 15 things to do in Rodrigues. Number one. And we get these awards very regularly, which is very encouraging for our field teams who are delivering this ecotourism on the ground. And by the way, this is also where we've been reintroducing Aldabra tortoises and doing very well. All right, challenges, funding is always a problem. If any of you know of contacts of very rich people who would like to help us buy a piece of land on Mauritius, please, let's talk. We have big problems with invasive alien species, and one that's coming up is Asian house crows. They've been there since 1950s. It was never a problem, but over the past 10 years, they've become a formidable predator of our native wildlife. And on Rodrigues, people have been trying to bring pets onto Rodrigues. So we are now battling green iguana invasion, and we've just been able to stop people bringing in ringneck parakeets into Rodrigues. Habitat destruction continues on Mauritius, destruction of wetlands, destruction of caves, and so on. So we are having to fight developers, and sometimes it's road enlargement, such as here, and sometimes it's building a hotel on a wetland. Sometimes it's cutting down paths for deer ranching. So we actually are battling with developers who are doing unsustainable practices. We are fighting, we are leading on the human-bat conflict work, which unfortunately, as I mentioned, has had high culling of any bat species. And one of the other problems that we've been having, I think is a victim of a success, is roadkills. So we have a site now where pink pigeons are coming to feed on food scraps that people leave on the side of the road. And when they take off, they're being hit by cars that are driving at 100 kilometers an hour. So at one site, it's become a problem. So we're now working with the authorities to try to resolve this problem, although they've been quite slow at finding the solutions. And one of the problems we have is administrative delays. This is one of 2 trees left in the world of the Xanthoxylum heterophyllum, paniculatum of Rodrigues. One of these trees is dying, but we've cracked how we can do rootstock cuttings of this plant. But we need to send plants from Mauritius to Rodrigues to be able to use as rootstocks. And the administrative delays is taken us 2 years, and we're still counting in terms of taking those stocks across, although we've cracked what the system is, what the technique is. Human resources, we are having a problem in Mauritius is that lots of young Mauritians want to go abroad. They want to find greener grass abroad. And so it's one of the challenges that we are having, retaining staff who would prefer to be, and I'll skip this one, staff who would want to go abroad. And many of our young people are going to Europe. And just in 2023, 5,000 young people, very often university trained, have left Mauritius to go to Canada, just as one country. So we're losing a lot of people, so it's becoming a problem for the conservation sector. Lessons learned. Conservation is a marathon. It's not a 100-meter steeple race. You have to be in here for the long run. And slow and steady is what wins the race. And you have to be patient. And this is what I say to all the young conservationists out there. I'll give you an example. This is Ramosmania rodriguesi, which I talked to you about. We started working on this in 1980. And last year, we had the first natural seedling in the wild. So it took 45 years to get the first natural seedling in the wild. Think about this. So if you were 20, you would be retiring by now, at the time when you get the first seedling. So this is the length of time that we're working on. We've had lots of failures along the way. You know, chicks that fail. Nest boxes that are taken by monkeys and rats. These are failures, but you actually get back at it and you try to improve what you're doing to make sure that you become a success. So do not feel defeated by those little failures. Hang in there, because not everybody is going to be on board. Remember when Noah built his ark, there were some people who were laughing at him. How many times do we get laughed at for what we're trying to do? And one of these examples is the Mauritius kestrel, which is now world an example of this, because somebody called Norman Myers, Professor Norman Myers, said, "We might abandon the Mauritius kestrel to all of its but inevitable fate and utilize the funds to proffer stronger support of any one of the hundreds of threatened birdie species that are more likely to survive." I met Professor Myers. I said, "Professor Myers, we've saved the kestrel." So you see, even when things look dire, recovery is possible. Fundraising is never ending, and we know this. I think all of us know this. And we always have to go back to the board, always have to fill out those applications. In a certain way, we always have to go back with a begging bowl to our funders. Sometimes we have to jump up and down as well to get those monies. And it's important that we do that. And what's important, I like what you said, do not lose your soul in the way that in whatever you're doing. And that's very, very important. Hang in there, but we have to inspire others, because the Ignatios, the Vikashas will be retired in the next 10, 15 years. So we actually need, because we are standing on the shoulders of giants, we need to be the shoulder for others to be standing on our backs, and for them to be empowered to do this work. I have seen organizations where people try to hold on too much, and that's not good. We have to inspire, we have to motivate, we have to train, we have to actually almost design our exit strategies so that others can take over. And it's very rare that we think of our roles as, I would say, as directors of organizations, thinking of actually our own exit strategies. Succession planning is important. Our exit staff are now some of our best allies, and even our current staff, of course. But our exit staff are now helping us fundraising, they are helping us in research, they are helping us in connecting with people. I go to every conference and I meet an ex-morpher, and coming here, seeing James, and going up in the world, and we come across all those probably 3,000, 4,000 people from probably up to 46 nationalities who have actually worked on our project in Mauritius. And we have it's now a very big global network of people. Conservation diplomacy. We don't talk a lot about conservation diplomacy. How many times do you need to meet a minister, meet a prime minister, meet a president, talk about a problem to your MP? That diplomacy is important. I do a lot of that work, meeting our ministers and talking to them about not 10 problems. You never talk 10 problems to a minister. You talk about one problem. Because if you talk about 10 problems, he's forgotten all the 10. You talk to him, every time you meet him, you talk to him about one problem. Even if you have to talk 5 times about the same problem, after the 6th time it will work. And this is conservation diplomacy. I had just broken my ankle on Round Island, by the way. It was COVID, in the middle of COVID. We had visitors, and we had to meet the minister of the day. I had just been operated 3 days before that. And that's why I go around in sandals, by the way. It's not because of disrespect for you. And you have to make it to those meetings. And you need to have those talks. Those talks are important. And it's important for us to actually train our youngsters into this sort of conservation diplomacy. It may be talking to funders. It may be talking to partners. It may be talking to the NGOs that's doing similar work on the ground. It may be talking to conservation organizations from the government, for example. So this conservation diplomacy is something that I think we need to be doing more training on that aspect. I talked to you about the Mauritius kestrel becoming the national bird. It wasn't my idea. It was Carl Jones who for 10 years before then had said we should make the kestrel the Mauritius bird. And then it remained an idea which was lost in oblivion. And then we were having the visits of senior ministers from government visiting our captive breeding center in Black River. And I said to Carl, I am going to talk to those ministers and I'm going to say, can we make the kestrel the national bird? I think the stars are aligned. I remember telling him, I think the stars are aligned, and it might be our one opportunity to make the kestrel a national bird. So they came here. This is the director of the national parks. This is me in crutches. And then at the end of the speech of the director of the national parks, nobody knew what I was going to talk about. I said, Mr. Ministers, I'd like to make a proposal that Mauritius does not have a national bird, despite independence for 55 years. I would like to propose that the Mauritius kestrel becomes the national bird. There was total silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Total silence. I thought these guys are going to burst in laughter and tell me what a fool you are. And they clapped. They clapped. And within 2 weeks, the Mauritius kestrel was the national bird. The timing is often right for these things, and it might take a long time for you to wait for that timing, but when that timing happens, make sure you're putting that message. And my final slide is to embrace technology. I've seen a lot of you on the ground. I see some flying in helicopters, which is great. I think we have to harness technology. We have to make much better use of technology that we've been doing. So, for example, we put audio moths in forests to reduce, because we've got a staff shortage, so we put audio moths and we let the audio moths work for us. We put remote cameras on islands. The cameras send a text message if somebody is coming onto the island. It warns us. We are getting to drones, using drones to do eradications of rats on islands. We are currently looking at it. We put those A24 traps. They come from New Zealand. They are self-resetting rat traps, kill traps. They are wonderful. And we've done a mainland island with these rat traps. And finally, I started off early with the Dodo. Once dead, always dead. But we are working with an organization which raises some eyebrows, I can say, but we are working with this organization to see whether we can bring back the Dodo. And whilst bringing back the Dodo through CRISPR, genetic editing, and all those different techniques, it may actually help us to improve the genetics of the pink pigeon, which has gone through a long-term bottleneck. So we are not saying no to technology, we're saying how can we embrace it, and are there pieces on that menu that we can use? And I think this is what I would end with, and we are trying to use those. I'll end here. Thank you very much, and sorry if I've taken too much of your time.